I never wanted to put this on record. Even now, scratching these words into paper that will almost certainly be burned or sealed in some underground archive, I feel the weight of eyes on me, not human eyes, something older, something that waits behind the silence. My name doesn't matter anymore. On paper, I was a technician, a night shift worker at Groom Lake, the site the public calls Area 51. In truth, I was an intelligence officer, seconded through a covert channel, trained to observe, to report, and if necessary, to bury whatever I found. My handlers told me I was there to monitor foreign leaks, Soviet satellites, Chinese chatter, Iranian operatives. They framed it as a counterintelligence posting. But in every briefing, in every set of classified-only orders slid across the desk to me, there was a phrase repeated like a prayer: observe. Do not interfere. That alone told me the truth. I wasn't guarding secrets. I was being exposed to them. Night shift on base carried a weight of silence unlike anything I've felt before. The desert outside was endless black, the stars sharp enough to pierce your eyes. Inside, the air was recycled until it tasted metallic, like breathing the inside of a gun barrel. Corridors hummed with fluorescent light, never steady, always flickering. The security patrols moved like shadows, their faces pale in the half-glow, as if the desert itself had leached the blood from them. Officially, I was to keep logs of equipment access. Atmospheric readouts comes chatter. But sometimes the comes weren't chatter at all. It'd pick up a frequency that wasn't assigned to any channel, just humming, like a voice trying to form syllables underwater. Once I thought it said my name. It's my real name, the one I hadn't used since joining Mossad. I never told anyone. The deeper into the night the shift went, the stranger the air felt. Not just heavy, thick. It's like walking through a pressure zone. Boots echoed too long against concrete floors. Security lights cast shadows that didn't quite follow the men who made them. It told me my job was to file the anomalies, to log them, to never react. But one night just past 0300, the anomalies stopped being something I logged on a clipboard. They became something I could feel behind me, breathing, waiting. This is where it begins. This is where I break protocol. Because what I saw under that desert was not built by us. It was not built for us. And yet, for reasons I still don't understand, it wants us down there. The base called it Project Lattice on internal memos, a catch-all for experiments that didn't fit public programs. On paper, Lattice was materials testing and propulsion prototypes. Beneath paper, and beneath the chain of command, it smelled of nuclear-grade coolant and something older than metallurgy. The facility hosted reactors in isolated vaults, cryocells with specimens the size of cars, and a network of sealed corridors that the maps refused to print. The people who came through those doors wore different logos, different languages, but the orders were always the same: compartmentalize, sanitize, and bury. My posting was an intelligence overlay. Watch the night ops, verify access, keep an eye for foreign probes. Stakes were simple when you read the cable. Protect national assets, prevent technology bleed, report anomalies up the ladder. But the ladder itself had missing rungs. There were offices that denied the existence of rooms beneath them. There were signatures that would not appear on any roster. I learned quickly that report meant two things: one for the logbook, one for the safe deposit envelope that never saw light again. Operational doctrine stressed containment. If an experiment failed, doctrine demanded immediate isolation, chemical neutralization if necessary, and complete media blackout. Personnel were reassigned, memories scrubbed with counseling sessions and classified medication. We were given rules to make chaos manageables that assumed chaos would remain instrumental, contained, comprehensible. Those assumptions were arrogance. The real danger wasn't the technology. It was how the technology tore open fissures in perception GP's drift. Time dilation across corridors, instruments reading things that instruments should not read. What started as a failure mode became, to some of us, evidence of a different system at works, something that responded to our probes, not by retreat but by learning. When the reactors hummed, some part of the facility answered in patterns no engineer wrote in a spec sheet. If Lattice was an experiment in physics, the stakes were metaphysical. Control over what we could observe, and the terrible cost if observation itself changed what existed. We were not merely guarding machines. We were unwittingly participants in an experiment that might be testing the limits of humans. They said my presence on the team was administrative overlap. That's the phrase they used. In truth, I was assigned because my handlers knew something unusual was escalating in the desert vaults. My cover was a logistics officer clipboard, comes headset, the quiet man with questions no one liked. The others thought I was just another night shift bureaucrat. But I watched them carefully, memorizing their habits, their silences, the way each of them reacted to the creeping weight of that place. We were 5 in total. 5 bodies against the endless black machinery of Groom Lake. Commander Rourke, the rationalist rank, Major. Branch, USAF, transferred from Strategic Recon. He carried himself like a man who had built walls around his mind and dared the world to breach them. His voice was flat, clipped, each order as precise as a scalpel. Rourke believed in control of the mission, control of his men, control of the unknown. He trusted procedure the way priests trust scripture. His hands never trembled, but his eyes. They carried the faint shadow of someone who had seen too much sky lit by nuclear fire. He chain-smoked when he thought no one was looking. Dr. Helena Varga, the medic. Civilian attachment, though her clearance level outstripped most colonels. Hungarian-born, trained in Vienna, recruited by DARPA for her work on neurochemistry. Her hands were always steady, her hair tied back in the same braid. Helena spoke rarely, but when she did, her tone was calm, clinical, as if describing a specimen on a slide. What unnerved me was how her knowledge sometimes spilled beyond human medicine. She could name organ structures in amphibians, recall blood chemistry of extinct species. She laughed it off, saying she was just a good reader. But when her eyes drifted in silence, I felt as though she were listening to voices the rest of us couldn't hear. Corporal Miguel Santos, demolitions short, wiry, brash. Puerto Rican background, Marine Corps, EOD transfer. His humor was reckless, his courage reckless, his appetite for chaos. Reckless, he fiddled with C for blocks the way some men shuffle cards. Precision with explosives came naturally to him, but he treated danger like a drinking buddy. In every silence, he whistled. In every tense moment, he grinned. Beneath that bravado, though, was something sad. I once saw him staring at a photograph folded so many times it was about to disintegrate, 2 children smiling on a beach. He tucked it away before anyone could ask. Specialist Daniel Keene, communications tall, pale, soft-spoken, signals intelligence analyst, background in code breaking. He carried notebooks filled with ciphers he wrote himself. Shorthand, mathematical lattice, cryptographic riddles no one else understood. Keene didn't talk much. But when he did, his voice was analytical, almost cold. Radios fascinated him. He once said, "Everything hums if you listen long enough. Even walls. Even silence." Sometimes he left receivers on frequencies no one authorized, listening for patterns in static. And sometimes he smiled at what he heard, like it was speaking to him. Sergeant John Mercer, the veteran leader Army Ranger, years older than the rest. He had the steady calm of a man who had led squads through jungles and deserts and had buried more brothers than he could count. Mercer wasn't officially in command, but everyone including Rourke looked to him when decisions pressed close. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was the anchor, the gravity keeping the others from spiraling. He carried a St. Michael medal on his dog tags and touched it when the air turned strange, muttering a prayer under his breath in words too quiet to catch. 5 of us in the desert night, each with a skill, each with a secret. The brass told us we were just monitoring. But I knew. I saw the way they avoided eye contact during briefing, the way sealed folders never reached our hands. This wasn't monitoring. It was a test. Whether we knew it or not, we were the subjects. Briefing rooms at Groom Lake smell like ozone and stale coffee. The walls carry the residue of too many secrets. The projector hummed with a light that felt clinical enough to sterilize memory. We were given a folder stamped eyes-only lattice operations and told to sit. Rourke read the outline without inflection, like a man reciting a litany he'd long ago stopped believing in. The page said containment, instrumentation, and strict non-interference. The page also said something else in a different hand. Observe emergent phenomena, acquire samples if safe, do not engage. The deployment was nominally a systems verification walk the lower levels. Confirm reactor stability, inspect cryo-holding seals, verify biometric sensors. In practice, it was reconnaissance with tacit permission to pry. The base had reported anomalous readings in Vault 7, intermittent power signatures, localized time drift on sensor logs, and a humidity gradient that defied the HVAC specs. We were to insert at 0200 run diagnostics on 3 nodes and extract within 90 minutes. That 90 minutes, they told us, was the window the facility could guarantee before automated containment protocols engaged. We were armed for deterrence, not war. Rifles with suppressors, a small pallet of stun devices, Miguel's EOD bag, and a case of experimental EMP dampeners labeled, classified, do not deploy, without authorization. The medic carried a compact kit with transdermal sedatives and a vial of an unmarked serum Helena refused to describe beyond. For neural shock, Keene carried his receivers and a bank of decoders. Mercer carried standard field supplies and a dogged patience. I carried a clipboard and a recorder, the latter because someone, somewhere, wanted a narrative. We moved through the facility in a practiced silence. The elevator rode like a throat swallowing us down into concrete. Lights in the shafts bled static across the metal. Our boots sounded too loud at first, then too soft, and then as if they were being eaten by the floor itself. Rourke wired the team with hand signals to down check node. 3 down, run the sweep. For down, abort, and withdraw. Communication was tight. Even the radios seemed to listen. At the Vault 7 ingress, the air changed. The decon lock cycled with a sound like a slow heartbeat. Radiation scanners read nominal. Thermal signatures were within expected ranges. Yet the environmental readouts flickered. Oxygen spiked, then dipped, then steadied to numbers that made no sense against the physical meter at my belt. Keene's face went still. His hands hovered over his receiver like a man over a newborn. He kept whispering figures under his breath frequencies, repetitions. A string of numbers that might have been coordinates or a prayer. Helena ran a quick health sweep on the team. No acute anomalies, she announced, voice even. But when I checked my recorder later, under the hiss of machinery and our breath, I could make out something else. A low undercurrent beneath the HVAC. An oscillation at a frequency that made the fillings in my teeth buzz. Miguel laughed once too loud and said, "Ghosts of the Cold War," but his fingers tightened on the EOD case until the knuckles showed white. We were not told officially what or who had been in Vault 7 before. Only that access had been restricted, that previous teams had been routed away, and that the anomaly had begun after a maintenance cycle performed by an off-site contractor with no clear provenance. Rourke clipped his night vision onto his helmet, adjusted the suppressor on his carbine, and looked at us the way a man looks at a child before sending it into the dark. "We do this clean," he said. "We observe. We do not become the story." I wrote that line down, then folded the paper and placed it in my inner pocket, next to the photograph Miguel kept hidden in his wallet. I did not know then which of us would keep what when the night was done. The descent into Vault 7 was not like moving through a building. It was like sinking into the lungs of something alive. The deeper we went, the more the air resisted, as if thickness itself wanted to hold us back. The elevator ground to a halt at sublevel 5 with a metallic cough. From there we moved on foot, 5 shadows cutting across long halls painted with hazard stripes, air ducts exhaling breath like a sleeping beast. Fluorescent bulbs flickered in regimented rows, but the light never seemed to chase the dark entirely away. Corners remained black, edges wavered, shadows stretched longer than their hosts. Rourke signaled us into formation. Mercer point, Miguel rear, Helena and Keene center, myself at the flank with the log kit. His voice came through, comes flat and deliberate. "Check sectors. No chatter unless necessary." The hallways narrowed the further in we went. Concrete shifting to alloy panels etched with codes only the engineers understood. I trailed my hand along one, felt warmth pulsing faintly through the steel, as if something alive pulsed behind the wall. I did not log that. Some truths resist ink. Keene stopped twice to adjust his receiver. Static bled into the earpieces, hissing like ocean waves. Then, without warning, a single sharp tone pierced the silence, long and high-pitched, until the lights overhead dimmed. "Feedback loop," Keene muttered. But his face had gone pale, and his pencil scribbled a string of numbers on his wristband. 14.07, 14.07, 14.07. Miguel tried to laugh it off. Man, I hate radios. Always sound like they're haunted. His boots tapped too loud against the metal flooring, like he wanted noise to fill the air. Helena glanced at him once brief. Cliniclan returned to her scanner. Mercer moved steadily, rifle raised, shoulders relaxed. He whispered, almost to himself, "Too quiet for a place running this deep. I don't think anyone was supposed to hear it." At sublevel 6, the first checkpoint came into view, a reinforced blast door with warning glyphs stenciled in both English and Russian. The Cold War ghosts Miguel had joked about seemed to leer at us from the paint. The panel accepted Rourke's keycard, but the lock cycled slow, grinding like gears clogged with sand. When it opened, the pressure-shifted dare exhaled outward, damp and metallic, like stepping into a storm drain after rain. Inside, corridors bent in angles that didn't make architectural sense. We mapped them straight. Our compasses insisted we were drifting in circles. Every 10 meters, motion sensors blinked as if registering something behind us. Mercer posted rear guard and saw nothing. But the blinking didn't stop. We crossed through hydrostatic seals, pressured doors, steel stairs that rang hollow beneath our boots. My log recorded oxygen fluctuation, 21%, 19.4%, then a spike to 23%. Helena frowned at her readout, tapped the screen, reset the calibration. "Instrument drift," she said. Her tone was calm, but her jaw clenched as she spoke. The journey stretched beyond time.
Oh.
My wristwatch read 2:27. Rourke's read 2:41. Mercer checked his analog. 2:35. We compared, said nothing, and moved on. At one junction, painted hazard stripes peeled back to reveal bare concrete scored with gouges, as if something had clawed outward from within the wall itself. Miguel whistled low. "Not on the blueprints," he muttered. He reached to touch the mark, and Mercer's hand snapped out, stopping him. Eyes forward, the veteran growled. Miguel obeyed. The last stairwell opened to a cavernous shaft. Catwalks crossed in steel lattice, descending into black that swallowed the light of our lamps. The hum of reactors bled upward through the structure, low and resonant, almost like chanting. The sound vibrated in my sternum, my teeth, the marrow of my bones. Rourke held up a fist, signaling halt. We stood on that graded platform, 5 specks above a gulf, listening to the machinery breathe. Keen whispered over Combs, though he swore later he hadn't spoken. "It's calling us, then." Without another word, Rourke pointed forward, down, always down, into Vault 7. The catwalk trembled under our weight as we descended. Not from instabilities. Construction was military-grade steel, cross-braced and welded. No, this tremor felt organic. A pulse that ran through the metal into our boots, a rhythm half a second off from our heartbeats. I tried to pace my steps to match it, but it always shifted, as if mocking synchronization. Vault 7 opened below like the rib cage of a leviathan, walls arcing outward and upward until they vanished into shadow. Flood lamps mounted on high girders flickered and died in a sequence that gave the illusion of movement across the walls, like shapes circling just beyond sight. Rourke's voice was steady in the Combs, "Stay tight." Mercer left flank. Santos's rear security. Keen log Combs anomalies. Helena, environmental sweeps every 2 minutes. Move. We moved. The floor plate at the base of the shaft bore the scars of welding torches and patched job savins of rushed expansions. Doors branched off into sectors labeled with alphanumeric codes V721, V722, V723. Our target was Node 3, the source of the anomalies. Rourke consulted his slate, muttered coordinates, and led us into a corridor that felt narrower than it should have been. Every surface was industrial, riveted steel, insulation foam, hazard stripes. But behind the industrial trappings was something else. Grooves etched into the alloy and looping arcs, faintly luminescent, like veins of mineral exposed in rock. They weren't decorative, and they weren't structural. Lena brushed a hand across one and withdrew it instantly. "Warm," she whispered, "like skin." I logged the statement, though I knew better than to file it on any official channel. Keen paused midway through the corridor, tilting his receiver. Static surged, then a burst of tones spilled through the earpiece, 3 rising notes, one falling, then silence. He scribbled symbols in his notebook, therefore, because, therefore. When I asked, he shook his head. Not ours, he said. Not anyone's. At Arling meters, the air thickened. Oxygen readouts were still nominal, but every breath carried metallic taste, as though the air itself was rusting inside our lungs. The silence grew heavy. Our boots didn't echo anymore.
Ow!
The sound was swallowed instantly, like the walls consumed it. We entered Node 3 through a bulkhead marked with 3 languages: English, Russian, and something in glyphs no one recognized. The door hissed open reluctantly. Inside was a chamber the size of a gymnasium, lined with reactor conduits and humming coolant tanks. At the far wall stood a containment unit, transparent, reinforced with crossbars, the kind designed for something alive and volatile. It was empty, but the floor around it was not. Symbols had been burned into the concrete in concentric circles, charred black. At the center, a faint phosphorescence pulsed, as though embers glowed beneath the floor. Miguel swore under his breath. No one told me we were babysitting witchcraft. He set down the IUD case, fingers twitching for det cord the way nervous men reach for cigarettes. Helena crouched to scan the markings. No heat source detected, she reported. But her voice was flat, detached, like she didn't believe her own words. Her scanner screen glitched, colors bleeding into symbols that matched the floor. She slapped it once, and the normal readouts returned. Mercer swept the room with his rifle, eyes never still. "This place stinks wrong," he muttered. Rourke ignored him, pacing the chamber perimeter. "We're not here to editorialize. Log it. Photograph it." But I noticed the way he avoided stepping near the glowing center, circling wide around it like a man skirting the edge of a grave. Keen's receiver crackled again, not static this time. A voice. Faint, layered, distorted. My name. Spoken in Hebrew, then in Russian. Then in my mother's voice. "Kill it," Miguel hissed. "Shut that thing off." But Keen only tightened his grip, as though letting go might mean losing something vital. "It's not interference," he whispered. "It's an invitation." And in that moment, as the coolant pipes groaned like distant wails, and the air pressed down heavier than the Nevada desert above us, I realized we hadn't entered Vault 7. Vault 7 had entered us. Rourke forced order back into the room with the weight of his voice. Standard procedure. Node 3 diagnostics. No deviations. Keen log signals. Santos perimeter. Helena, environmental sweep. Mercer, secure the ingress. Move. The rhythm of commands steadied us, if only for a moment. We obeyed, each of us, clinging to routine like a lifeline. Miguel unpacked his kit, laying out sensors and charges with the casual grace of a gambler setting cards on a table. "Room's clean," he announced after a slow sweep with the Geiger counter. "Don't rads above background. If this thing glows, it's not nuclear." His words were confident, but his eyes kept straying back to the charred symbols in the concrete, as if they might crawl toward him when no one looked. Helena crouched by a coolant tank scanner in one hand, stethoscope pressed against the alloy with the other. The readout gave neat rows of figures, temperature steady, pressure nominal, but her face twisted. "Heartbeat," she murmured. "It sounds like a heartbeat." She tapped the stethoscope, checked again. "Oh, that can't be right." She closed her kit a little too quickly. Mercer walked the chamber's edges, rifle at low, ready eyes, tracking corners and shadows. Every few steps, he paused to touch the St. Michael medal at his chest. His lips moved in words I couldn't hear. When he caught me looking, he gave a faint shake of the head. "Don't ask." Keen sat cross-legged near the containment unit, headphones pressed to his ears, pencil flying across the notebook balanced on his knee, lines, curves, ciphers, none of it resembling any codebook I knew. Occasionally he'd smile faintly, nodding to something no one else could hear. When I asked what he was recording, he replied in a whisper, "Instructions." Rourke logged system checks on his slate, each keystroke sharp. He kept his distance from the burned glyphs, circling around them as though stepping too close would violate some unspoken clause. He issued short, controlled updates into comms, knowing damn well no one topside was listening at this hour. Node 3, operational. Environmental variance within expected range. It's proceeding with extended survey. His voice was calm, but his free hand tapped against his thigh in a restless rhythm. I moved through the chamber with my recorder, noting anomalies in my clipped professional cadence. Oxygen stable, pressure within range, containment unit intact, but inactive. My words sounded rational on tape, stripped of the unease swelling in my chest. The act of narrating reduced terror into bullet points till the hum in the walls began answering back. For several minutes it felt almost routine. Sensors beeped, logs filled, photographs were taken. The chamber's geometry settled into the illusion of familiarity. Steel, pipes, concrete, men at work. The smell was oil and metal. The silence was controlled. And then, just as our shoulders began to loosen, as the illusion of normalcy wrapped itself over us like a blanket, one of Miguel's seismic probes tapped back. A single knock. From beneath the concrete, he froze, staring at the probe. Knocked again 2, then 3. Rhythmic, deliberate. Seismic echo. Helena offered too quickly. Could be thermal expansion. Miguel's lips curled in a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Expansion doesn't keep time, Doc. Rourke's voice cut across the tension like a blade. Log it. Continue ops. We did, but the air had shifted again. The silence was no longer empty, it was listening. The disturbance came subtle, almost ignoble, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Helena had just finished logging oxygen variances when her scanner froze mid-cycle. The numbers blinked nonsense. 999%, then 0%, then a string of symbols not on any keyboard. She frowned, tapped the device. It flickered back to normal. She didn't speak, but I saw her knuckles whiten around the handle. Keen stiffened at the same time, head cocked as if listening to something in the static. It's out of phase, he whispered. No one asked what it was. He scribbled a sequence of triangles into his notebook, hands trembling for the first time. Miguel had moved closer to the containment unit, curiosity tugging him despite Rourke's unspoken ban. Looks like something burned its way out, he muttered, crouching to study the charred sigils on the floor. He reached out a hand half a centimeter from the glowing center, when the steel beneath our boots shifted, not shook, shifted, like the floor itself exhaled. Our lamps wavered. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, peeling away from our bodies by a half-second delay. I turned my head left, but my shadow lagged behind, still staring forward. My throat clenched. Mercer caught it too. He barked, eyes up, and swung his rifle toward the far wall. Nothing there, only pipes and scaffolding. But his finger rested near the trigger, the steady veteran suddenly unsteady. The knock beneath Miguel's probe returned for beats this time, then silence. Then a faint vibration crawling up through the concrete into our boots like footsteps pacing directly below us. Sublevel access? I asked. My voice came out hoarse. Rourke's reply was sharp. No sublevels below 7, you know that. But his eyes betrayed him. He had checked the maps, too. The hum in the walls deepened, taking on cadence. Not mechanical, not random. Something closer to chant, resonating through pipes and panels until my teeth ached. Helena pressed the stethoscope back against the coolant tank. She flinched, yanked it away as though burned. Not a heartbeat, she whispered. Her voice cracked. A voice. Before anyone could respond, every lamp in the chamber blinked at once, one long flicker, then return. But in that fraction of darkness, I swear I saw figures around the containment unit. Pale, tall, jointed wrong, watching. When the light steadied, the chamber was empty. Only us. Miguel broke the silence with a laugh that wasn't laughter. Yeah, he said softly. Haunted. No one corrected him this time. The chamber no longer felt like a structure of steel and concrete. It had become membranazes, if we were inside something alive, and it was beginning to notice us. It started with the shadows. At first, they only lagged. A second's delay, no more. But then they began to wander. I watched Helena's silhouette peel away from her body entirely, drifting across the wall like oil spilled on water. It bent down, peering into the coolant tank, though Helena herself stood motionless, eyes shut tight as if willing it to stop. Miguel swore under his breath and swept his flashlight across the floor. Low. His beam caught prints fresh, wet-looking impressions in the concrete dust. Bare feet. Too long. The stride uneven, as though something dragged one limb behind it. The prints led from the containment unit to the corner where we had entered, then vanished as if the door had swallowed them whole. Negative human traffic, Mercer reported, but his voice was tight, strained. His rifle tracked every flicker at the edge of his vision, yet nothing held still long enough to be called target. Keen's notebook slipped from his hands. Pages fluttered across the floor, covered not with his tidy cryptographic shorthand, but with rows of vertical marks, each one like a tally scratched by someone counting down. "I didn't write that," he said, barely audible. His pupils were blown wide, as if he had stared into some blinding light. The flickers grew worse. Lights cut for fractions of a second, long enough for the world to change in those gaps. A tool that had been on the floor reappeared, balanced atop a pipe, cable reel unspooled by 3 meters. Rourke's tablet, which he'd been holding a breath earlier, lay across the room by the charred symbols. He retrieved it in silence, face locked in command neutrality. But when his gloved hand brushed the burn marks, the entire chamber groaned. Deep, structurally yet not mechanical. The sound carried weight like stone dragged across stone in some abyssal cavern. Then we heard it. Footsteps, not ours. Slow, deliberate, circling us just outside the arcs of our lamps. Each step accompanied by a scrape, as if claws clicked lightly against steel. "Thermal scan now," Rourke barked. Helena aimed her imager into the dark. The screen filled with bloom heat where there should have been cold. Cold where there should have been heat. A form resolved, tall, impossibly thin, head elongated. Then another, and another. Figures pacing in a wide ring around us, just out of reach. "They're inside the walls," she whispered. A pulse of static tore through Keen, yanked off his headset with a cry. From the tiny speaker, a voice leaked through, low, layered syllables that made no sense yet carried command. The same rhythm as the knocks, the same rhythm as the hum. Every one of us froze, except Miguel. He laughed again, too loud, too sharp. "They're not knocking," he said. "They're asking to come in." The shadows answered by moving closer. We did not see it all at once. No cinematic reveal. It seeped into perception the way a migraine builds. Aura, distortion, then the full fracture of reality. The footsteps that had circled us stopped. Silence pressed in so dense it felt like insulation packed in our ears. Even our own breathing sounded muted, like we were underwater. The hum beneath the floor deepened, shifting into a slow pulse that matched no human heartbeat. Then the corridor behind Mercer lengthened. What had been 10 meters stretched to 30 in a blink, light warping as though refracted through liquid glass. He swung his rifle up, trying to track the distortion, and that's when it stepped through. A figure humanoid only in outline peeled itself out of the wall. Skin, if it could be called that, shimmered like mercury disturbed by breath. No features, no face, only impressions that shifted with each flicker of the lights. One instant eyeless, another 100 eyes where none should be. It was not simply present. It was overlaid onto our space, a projection and a body at once. Keen muttered a string of numbers, voice shaking, not words coordinates, binary fragments, bursts of static shaped into sound. His headset lit up, though the comms were disconnected. "It's inside my channel," he gasped. Mercer fired first. 3-round burst. The chamber shook with the gunfire, but the rounds did nothing pass through like hitting vapor. Yet the vapor reacted. Its form rippled outward in concentric rings, every ripple humming against the fillings in my teeth, the bones in my hands. The air went metallic, sharp as blood in the throat. Helena staggered, pressing her temples. It's not light. It's equations. It's written into the photons." Her words broke into sobs as the thermal imager in her grip exploded into static. Across the screen flashed glyphs, glowing symbols that bent into configurations I half recognized from the coolant tank markings. Rourke tried to pull her back, but the entity extended, not with arms, not even with mass, just an intention that took form. The shadow of a limb reached across the floor, black on black, until it touched her boot. She screamed once. Not pain. Recognition. Like she had remembered something meant to stay buried. Her eyes rolled back, and when they returned, her pupils glowed faint white, like phosphor traces. Miguel, laughing again, stepped toward it. "You see? It wants us," he said. His grin stretched too wide, skin paled with sweat. "We're the ignition. We're the charge." The entity bent its head toward him, though no head truly existed. Its presence thickened until every lamp flickered out. leaving only its glow silver black, undulating like deep water under moonlight. Miguel reached forward, touched it, and in the flash that followed, his hand was gone. No wound, no blood. Just absent. His arm ended mid-forearm, as if sculpted that way since birth. The entity did not move closer. It did not lash out. It simply existed, filling the chamber with a pressure so vast it dwarfed anger, hunger, anything we could name. An intelligence patient enough to wait for decades, for centuries, for us to stumble into its orbit. Rourke's voice broke through in a growl. Form up. Do not look directly at it. Eyes on me. But it was too late. The chamber itself had changed. The door we'd entered through was gone, replaced by a smooth wall inscribed with faint glowing lines. Time on my wristwatch spun backward. 23:14, 23:13, 23:12. And the entity, shimmering, stepped closer, its voice finally arriving, not through sound, but through memory. Every one of us heard it differently, but the meaning was the same. You open the lattice, we will finish it. The instant the words lodged inside our skulls, the chamber seemed to shift from hostile environment into apparatus. We weren't intruders anymore. We were components, the entity expanded. Not physically, not in any sense of measurable geometry, but perceptually. It filled every angle of vision, every crevice of thought. Walls bent outward like lungs inhaling, the steel groaning with a wet resonance that suggested bone instead of metal. Mercer planted himself between us and it. Rifle braced, voice iron even as it trembled. On me. Eyes on me. We are not part of this, but we were. Lena convulsed against the wall, phosphor still burning in her pupils. She began listing anatomical terms under her breath: sternum, clavicle, mandible, zygomatic. But then the terms slipped into languages no one had taught her. She muttered in Latin, then Arabic, then something older, clicks and guttural sounds that scraped across my spine. Her voice multiplied, as though 3 or 4 different Helens were speaking at once, all describing the same body as if it were a specimen on a slab. Her hands twitched in surgical motions, suturing invisible threads across the air. And when she looked at me, she whispered, "Your blood type is not yours anymore." Miguel was worse. Where his hand had been erased, there was now possibility. The absence moved, shifting along his arm like a liquid void. He pressed the stump against his chest and laughed until it turned to choking. The entity rippled in answer. His missing hand reappeared for a fraction of a second, but upside down, fingers bending backward, palm lined with teeth. Then it vanished again. He began muttering about charges, blast radii, shaping the void. He traced arcs on the floor with his boot, patterns that matched the burn marks we'd seen. When Rourke ordered him to stop, Miguel saluted with the absent limb. Keen's headset fused to his skull. I swear I saw the plastic melt into flesh, though no heat registered. He screamed once, then fell silent, lips moving in perfect sync with the static. Our comms were dead, batteries drained. But voices leaked through anyway, thousands layered over each other, men and women, children, dialects from every corner of Earth. They spoke nonsense, but in Keen's throat it braided into coherence. Signal received. Transmission stable, repeat. Transmission stable. Every time his voice layered, the lights dimmed further. Rourke resisted the longest. He kept us in formation, shouting orders, dragging Helen off the wall, slapping Miguel across the face. He refused to look at the entity. But his memory was being eaten alive in real time. "Where's the exit?" he asked me twice in 1 minute. "Where's Helena?" I demanded, while holding her by the shoulders. By the time we circled back toward the coolant tank, he turned to Mercer and barked, "Name, soldier." Mercer answered, flat but steady. "Mercer, sir." Rourke repeated the name under his breath, over and over, as though he could only hold facts if he recited them continuously. And Mercer, our hard shell, our center, he began to flicker. I don't mean psychologically, I mean visually. His frame would stutter like a skipped film reel. One instant he was 3 steps ahead, the next he lagged behind, weapon jerking at angles no body could maintain. His voice carried an echo, even when he whispered, and sometimes the echo answered him with words he hadn't said. Still, he kept his bearing. "Stay disciplined," he growled, even as his own image bent and split. The chamber adjusted to us. Corridors budded like veins, splitting into paths that hadn't existed. The coolant tank emptied in silence, revealing not coils but an aperture. An opening into blackness where sound fell inward and never returned. Our watches failed completely. Helena's read for 12, Mercer's 21:06. Mine counted down from 90 minutes. The entity never attacked. It simply presided. Each of us was rewritten, piece by piece, to fit whatever experiment it was running. We weren't dying, we were converging. At some point, I realized my own perception was fracturing. My field notes, the ones I'd been scribbling in shorthand, shifted beneath my eyes. The words became symbols. The symbols became diagrams. The diagrams became something alive. I dropped the notebook, and the pages wriggled across the floor like trapped insects. That was when Keen's voice, no longer his, entirely intoned through the static, phase complete, commence breach. The walls convulsed outward. Metal screamed like tortured lungs. The aperture in the tank widened into a tunnel, darker than absence, pulling air into itself with a steady inhale. And the entity moved closer. Not to kill, to welcome. The chamber had ceased to be architecture. It was now a bridge. Air sucked toward the aperture where the coolant tank had been. Each inhale of the void bending the steel frame inward like paper. Our flood lamps flickered in desperate semaphorin. Off, and then died entirely, leaving only the silver-black glow radiating from the entity. Mercer planted his boots, rifle raised, his outline flickering like bad film stock. His command voice roared, "Hold position! We will not step into it!" But the ground disagreed. Every surface vibrated, ripples spreading outward as if the chamber were floating on liquid. Our balance faltered. My legs felt lighter, as though gravity had shifted sideways. Helena screamed, clutching her head. "It's rewriting anatomy." Her voice fractured into 3 languages at once, all shouting the same words. Blood trickled from her ears, but her eyes glowed brighter, phosphorescent lenses staring at the aperture as if hypnotized. Keen collapsed, headset still fused, body convulsing with the static transmissions. His mouth opened and the voices of dozens poured out, overlapping phase transition. Lattice, engaged, breach, breach. The aperture pulsed. It wasn't a hole, it was a window. And through it, geometry that shouldn't exist. Structures built from angles that bent backward, towers of liquid shadow, oceans suspended in air. Across that impossible landscape, figures moved, elongated silhouettes, jointless, their limbs flowing like ink. They turned as one, sensing us. Miguel laughed again, hysterical. His absent arm writhed, invisible fingers gripping at air. "They're showing us the charge. Don't you see? The whole world is wired waiting to go off." "Shut it down," Mercer bellowed, firing burst after burst into the aperture. Each round passed into the void, each impact exploding as flowers of light that bloomed, wilted, and died in an instant. The breach only widened, fed by his defiance. Rourke-steady, even as his memory collapsed, grabbed Mercer's collar. "Stop firing, son. It wants the energy, it feeds on it." His own eyes rolled for a moment, blank. Then he steadied. He began to recite names, ours, his own, over and over, as if clinging to identity was the only defense left. The entity finally moved. It stepped between us and the aperture. Not to block, not to attack, just to stand. Its form split into 1,000 overlapping versions, some too tall for the ceiling, some hunched, some eyeless, some crowned with symbols that rotated like planetary orbits. And then it spoke again, not through sound, through memory. Every one of us heard a different phrase. "Helena, your species is cataloged." Keen, transmission confirmed. Miguel, detonate the design. Rourke, forget. Mercer, resist. Me, right. The walls bent further inward. Steel screeched, showering sparks. My chest felt compressed, as though my ribs were being forced into a new alignment. Helena staggered forward, arms outstretched. Mercer grabbed her, but she twisted with inhuman strength, whispering anatomy in alien tongues. Keen's body rose from the floor, suspended by nothing, static pouring from his throat in crescendos. Miguel tore free of us all, sprinting straight at the aperture. He didn't fall in, folded in, his body collapsing into flat shadow, sucked across the threshold like a blueprint returning to its origin. The breach widened in answer. Mercer turned, eyes locked on me. His face flickered, half here, half elsewhere. We're not holding this, not with guns. Get ready to move. Rourke barked the order like it was the last he'd ever give. Fall back. Containment failed. Behind us, the door we had lost reappeared, only it was wrong, too tall, inscribed with symbols that writhed like veins. The entity tilted its head, waiting. We ran. And the chamber exhaled, sending us into the collapse. We bolted for the door that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Every step against the chamber's pull like running through a current. The aperture behind us inhaled, dragging dust, bolts, even entire cables into its widening throat. The entity did not pursue. It only watched, its silhouette fracturing into dozens of versions of itself, each one frozen mid-step. Rourke led the charge, reciting our names like a rosary. Mercer, Helena Keene. McGilly stopped, teeth grinding when he realized Miguel was gone. He spat the loss out like a curse and barked, "Move." The door loomed, its surface rippling with glyphs that crawled like living veins. When Mercer slammed his shoulder into it, the metal yielded with a scream of pressure, peeling inward instead of outward. We stumbled into a corridor that should have led back toward the service elevators. Instead, it bent upward at a steep incline, lined with conduits that pulsed as though pumping blood. The air tasted like copper and ozone. Our boots slapped against the steel, but the sound never echoed. It was swallowed instantly, as if the walls wanted silence. Helena fell to her knees halfway up, clutching her temples. "There are too many bones in me," she shrieked, fingers clawing at her own ribs. Mercer dragged her upright with one hand, jaw clenched, eyes flickering in and out of phase. Behind us, the pull intensified. Papers, gear, even loose bolts slid back toward the chamber, disappearing into the aperture's gravitational hunger. Keene's headset sparked, his body jerking as if some unseen puppeteer tugged his strings. Static poured from him, rising to a deafening crescendo. Transition incomplete, extraction required. Extractions ahead. Rourke barked, though his voice wavered. Couldn't remember his own call sign anymore. His face was pale, sweat dripping as he muttered it to himself under his breath. Rourke, Rourke, Rourke. We reached the top of the incline, slamming into another door. This one was worse, its frame, bending in impossible directions, corners collapsing into curves. My eyes watered trying to process it. Mercer didn't hesitate. He smashed the emergency override. Sparks erupted, the door peeled open, and beyond it, a shaft of desert night spilled in. We staggered out into air that was wrong. The Nevada desert should have been dry, sharp with dust. Instead, it tasted metallic, heavy, almost liquid on the tongue. The sky glowed with colors I had no names for, hues that bent and writhed, as though painted across a living canvas. I checked my watch. 90 minutes had passed underground. On the surface, only 20 minutes had elapsed. Shadows fell in directions that made no sense, north, south, east, all at once. Our own silhouettes twitched with delay, lagging behind as if reluctant to follow us into freedom. Helena collapsed, whispering medical jargon from centuries past. Keene lay twitching, static still pouring from his fused headset. Mercer stood tall, though his image doubled and stuttered, as if two versions of him were trying to occupy the same patch of sand. Rourke dropped to his knees, staring at the horizon. The mountains loomed, but they were wrong. Too many ridges, too many peaks. Like the land itself had been copied and pasted imperfectly. The facility doors behind us slammed shut with a sound like a vault ceiling. The glyphs burned for a moment, then went dark. And in that silence, under a sky that bent in ways human eyes weren't built to endure, we realized we had escaped the chamber, but not what it had done to us. We assembled on the sand like wreckage after a crash, alive, breathing but no longer whole. The desert night pressed close, thick and metallic, the stars bending as if seen through warped glass. Helena was the first to show the damage. She sat upright, trembling, pupils still glowing faintly. Her hands moved in restless surgical motions, stitching the air. Sternum, ulna. Hepatocyte, she whispered, then switched into Latin, then something older. Knowledge was scrambled, centuries of anatomy spliced together, species I couldn't name. She looked at Rourke and calmly diagnosed him with organs he didn't possess. Keene tried to remove the headset fused to his skull, but the plastic was part of him. Now skin and wire melted together. When he opened his mouth, no human voice came out. Its electronic tones, like a modem struggling to connect, punctuated by bursts of foreign words. He stared at us in mute horror, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face, while the static spoke for him. Mercer checked his weapon with iron discipline, but his outline flickered, double exposed. Two Mercers moved half a step out of syncs, sometimes behind. His commands overlapped with echoes he didn't mean to say. At one point he ordered us to fall back, and the echo barked fall forward. Both commands were true, both impossible to obey. Rourke fared no better, walked the perimeter of our landing zone, muttering names under his breath, mine Mercer's. Helena's. Each time he came back to Keen, he hesitated, as though he had already forgotten him. "What's his name?" he asked me, eyes hollow. A minute later, he asked again. His memory was rewriting itself, smoothing over anomalies, sculpting the night into something safer. And me, I felt the alteration too. My notebook, stuffed in my vest, had changed. The words I'd written weren't mine anymore. Pages filled themselves in real time with symbols, maps of places I'd never been. When I tried to tear them out, the paper bled a fine dust that shimmered like ash. None of us were untouched. None of us would ever pass a medical screen without tripping alarms. We were altered, rewritten, calibrated to some experiment whose purpose we couldn't guess. And the worst part, the desert, was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no insects. Just us, huddled under a sky painted with impossible colors, waiting for an extraction that would not ask the right questions. We weren't survivors. We were specimens. The helicopters came faster than protocol allowed, too fast, as if they had been waiting. Rotor wash flattened the sand, kicking up a storm that erased our footprints. No medics rushed us, no weapons leveled for safety, all just for men in sterile gray coveralls guiding us into the bird with motions that felt rehearsed, like stagehands moving props. Inside, the cabin was silent, no shouted orders, no come chatter. A medical corpsman sat across from us, clipboard in hand. He didn't look at our wounds, didn't check Helena's glowing eyes or Keen's fused headset. He only asked for names, ranks, and confirmation that the chamber was secure. When Rourke began to recite names again, his voice cracked. The corpsman nodded as though satisfied, scribbled nothing onto the clipboard, and dismissed us. The flight should have taken 40 minutes. My watch marked 3. When we landed, it was not at the standard intake hangar, but a secondary building, unmarked, windowless, humming faintly as though it housed its own reactor. Inside, white walls, bright lights, an antiseptic smell so sharp it burned the sinuses. They separated us without ceremony, each of us into a private room, stripped of gear, given hospital gowns. Cameras stared from every corner. Interrogation followed. A man in a pressed uniform, insignia blurred from overuse of polish, sat across from me. His voice was calm, clinical, without malice. He asked what I had seen. When I spoke the truth, the words changed in my mouth. Entity. I tried to say, but what emerged was equipment malfunction. I forced myself to describe the aperture, but the report flowed out as containment door breach stabilized. My tongue betrayed me, rewriting testimony before it left my throat. Every attempt to insist collapsed into the sanitized version. The officer never corrected me, never pressed. He only wrote, nodded, and finally said, "Good, that's consistent. We were released into identical rooms, beds, desks, locked doors. No restraints, no visible guards, but escape impossible." Every time I tried to write down what happened, the ink shifted into meaningless jargon. Reactor output, coolant ratios, stress fractures. The truth bled away into engineering fiction. When we were finally reunited, hours or days later, I couldn't tell our stories matched perfectly. Too perfectly. Minor malfunction. Systems secured. Team unharmed. But we were not unharmed. Helena's hands trembled, tracing phantom incisions across the table. Keen's mouth spilled static when he tried to speak. Mercer's outline flickered under the fluorescent light, double images phasing in and out. Rourke smiled with vacant calm, his memory already pruned. He asked me my name 3 times in a row. They told us we'd be reassigned. Not discharged, not debriefed further. Reassigned. New roles, new files. Helena to medical research, Keen to communications analysis, Mercer to tactical testing. Rourke to advisory mirrorcords. Files stamped with our mission code were sealed into a crate labeled non-existent archive. I watched them roll it down the corridor, vanishing behind a door with no marking. Containment wasn't about the entity. It was about us. We had been absorbed into a system that knew how to bury evidence, not anomalies. They released me at dawn. Or something that looked like dawn. The transport doors opened, and the desert stretched wide and empty, sky painted in soft pink haze. A guard handed me a sealed folder, my reassignment orders, and turned without a word. When I blinked, the helicopter that had brought me was gone, rotor wash fading like a dream I'd just missed. I walked until the horizon broke. The air carried a humming undertone, like power lines strung too close to the ground. My boots sank into sand softer than it should have been, as if the desert itself had been sifted through unseen hands. That's when I saw it. Half buried in the dunes just beyond the ridgeline, the chamber door, not destroyed, not sealed, standing upright like a monument. Its surface was burned with the same glyphs I had seen glowing when we opened it. They pulsed faintly, rhythms synced to my heartbeat. Helena's whispers echoed in my head. Keen static, Mercer's split commands, Rourke's fading memory. All of it bled into that humming, into the rhythm of the glyphs. The door wasn't waiting to be opened, it was waiting for us to come back. And the worst part, etched in fresh lines across its face, carved in the same impossible script, was my name. It's not my rank, not my call sign, my name. The sand shifted underfoot as if the desert itself were breathing. I stumbled back, folder clutched in my hands, heart pounding with the sick realization that the entity hadn't stayed behind in the vault. It had followed us out, folded into our marrow, into our paper, into the words we couldn't control. Facility would suppress it, the reports would erase it. But the door knew me now, and doors, once they learn your name, do not forget.